I have to admit, I had a little trouble writing the script for this video. I try to be critical only of this woman's writing. But there are things that I find or just happen to notice that rubs me the wrong way. If you want to know about it, just ask, but I will not be discussing it in this video. Months ago, when I published What is Feminism Part 1, I came across an article by Jos Truitt. Now you may be asking, just who is Jos Truitt? Well, she's the Executive Director of Development at Feministing, so keep in mind, this isn't just someone that occasionally writes for Feministing. This is someone who is high up within Feministing's ranks. I was originally going to go through several articles by Miss Truitt, but that one article I already reviewed had enough links to create this video. The article was titled, Against Visibility. It started off highlighting Jared Leto winning a Golden Globe and an Oscar for playing a trans woman in Dallas Buyers Club, and went into reasons why not all publicity for trans women is a good thing. I agreed with part of it, where she touched upon Andrew Sullivan saying trans people should be willing to talk about their genitals to others. I agreed that it was a private thing and trans people have every right to decline as anyone else. However, after that, the article took a huge nosedive into insanity. For instance, we get a peek at what kind of mentality she has as she says, quote, I didn't understand that it was possible for me to exist when I was a kid because none of the representations of trans women I saw were humanizing or really possible to identify with. So already, we can see that she's the type that seeks validation through the media. I point this out, not as a personal attack, but to show that as a trans woman, she has a vested interest in helping transgendered people get better representation in the media. Unfortunately, it also causes her to be very dramatic about things, and she blows things out of proportion to show trans people just have horrible lives in our culture.
As I have argued before, negative visibility can have a deadly impact. Media coverage that dehumanizes trans women even in death, using the wrong name and pronouns for murder victims or writing about them in salacious ways that suggest they had it coming, feeds a culture-wide understanding of trans women as less than human.
Already we can see where she's gotten the idea that trans people have it so bad in the world that she classifies using the wrong name or pronoun as dehumanizing. Now there could be reasons why using the quote-unquote wrong name could be used. For instance, if a trans woman is murdered, but her legal name is still the name she was given at birth, calling them by their legal name isn't really using the incorrect name simply because they preferred a different one. Speaking as a guy that hates his real name, I tell people to call me different things. However, if I become a victim of murder or any crime that gets media coverage, I would expect them to use my legal name because technically, that's my true name at the time. Now if there are instances where trans women have indeed changed their legal name to signify their identity as a woman and the media uses their male birth name, then yes, that's very wrong. I just find it far more likely that people are using trans women's legal names more than the preferred name that isn't really their name yet. Jos links 4 articles in that one sentence, but I really want to focus on the last one. If you want to read the other 3, I'll have a link to Against Visibility in the description. The article she links to is her own article from a few years ago titled, Take Action, Anti-Trans Victim Blaming in the New York Times. She talks about Lorena Escalera, a transgendered escort that died in a fire. The New York Times article starts off by saying Lorena was an attractive woman that was known for bringing men to her apartment, and that she had 2 men over the night she died. Now before I go over what Jos Truitt had to say about the article she's talking about, allow me to go over it first, link in the description below.
Though the fire has been deemed suspicious, investigators have found no evidence of accelerant, said one law enforcement official. The police were still awaiting a determination on the cause from fire marshals. The victim's roommates said that when work was done on the electrical system, they created holes around the electrical outlets and filled them with cardboard, the official said.
I should point out that Lorena's death was later ruled a murder, but from looking online, it's still unsolved. However, it's important to note that information wasn't known yet, and it was still seen as simply suspicious.
Oscar Hernandez, 30, a mechanic, said she had had some of her ribs removed in an effort to slim her waist. For a man, he was gorgeous, Mr. Hernandez said, noting Miss Escalera's flowing hair and hourglass figure. Gary Hernandez, 25, a neighbor, said that Miss Escalera had worked as an escort and that he regularly saw her advertising her service on an adult website. She was always on her laptop posting ads about herself, said Mr. Hernandez, who is not related to Oscar Hernandez. Still, she was a nice person.
Here we have two men that knew her, or at least knew of her, and actually had nice things to say about her. Sure, Oscar's comment about her being a man isn't politically correct, but his intent was to show she was very attractive. Gary's comment made note of her services, but he clearly didn't hold it against her, as he also noted she was a nice person. We don't know whether or not Gary approved of her actions, but there's no sign that he was bigoted in any way. Isn't that what we as a society would want? People that don't necessarily agree with your choices, but leave you to make those choices anyway. Now let's see what Jos had to say about it.
A few paragraphs later, the article also cleverly reveals that Lorena was trans, or as the paper says, she was born male. The article relies on accounts from Lorena's neighbors to paint a picture of her. Mostly, the account comes from two men, one of whom says he knew she did sex work because he saw her computer. The other guy is quoted as saying, for a man, he was gorgeous. Hourglass figure. Because apparently those words really deserve to see print. I'm flashing back to the New York Times coverage of the gang rape in Cleveland, DX, when the paper interviewed neighbors to paint a picture of an 11-year-old girl as a slut who was asking for it. Specific stereotypes about trans women are being deployed in this article, like that were deceptive. It's not that she was Lorena. It's that she was called Lorena. But focusing on her appearance and bringing up sex work is the same old shit we always hear about how slutty women bring violence upon themselves. We don't yet know the details of what happened to Lorena, if it was even a murder, and already the Times is blaming the victim.
Okay, so Jos doesn't like that the article mentioned her sex work and a guy that found her attractive. I can see her point about saying, she was called Lorena. But it was literally one time in the article. Even though it mentioned she was born male and suggested she was called Lorena one time, the rest of the article refers to her as a woman and by her name. Seems like grasping at straws to me, as that's a rather nitpick thing to complain about. Jos goes on to mention how trans women are stereotyped this way, suggesting because the article said she was called Lorena, again, only one time, and mentioned her sex work, they were actually trying to imply that trans women are deceptive sluts. She also uses it as a way to throw out the typical, the media paints women as sluts that deserve the violence they receive card. That's a mighty leap in logic. And frankly, it sounds more like Jos is using Lorena's death as political ammo. Jos also makes a heavy-handed mention of a gang rape of an 11-year-old girl, so we'll look at that too. There are actually two links. Both are Feministing articles, not written by Jos, talking about it. I'm going to focus on why did we even get out of bed this morning, as it has the quote from the New York Times article that I was going to highlight. I'll put both Feministing links in the description.
Residents in the neighborhood where the abandoned trailer stands, known as the Quarters, said the victim had been visiting various friends there for months. They said she dressed older than her age, wearing makeup and fashions more appropriate to a woman in her 20s. She would hang out with teenage boys at a playground, some said. Where was her mother? What was her mother thinking? Said Miss Harrison, one of a handful of neighbors who would speak on the record. How can you have an 11-year-old child missing down in the Quarters? What was her mother thinking? What about the more than dozen men who brutally raped an 11-year-old child? What were they thinking? But no. Let's lay the blame where it belongs, with the mother of the rape victim, the slutty 11-year-old who wore makeup and therefore deserves whatever she gets.
And this right here, is exactly why I can't take modern feminism seriously. What were the rapists thinking? Probably about how they were going to rape her. And you know what? I don't think they care what you think or anyone else thinks. Why? Because rape is such a heinous crime that anyone with any moral fiber would know that it's wrong. even if it's just on the logic of not forcing someone to do something against their will. So damn what those rapists were thinking, because we all know they don't care about your judgment. The reason why Miss Harrison was asking what the 11-year-old girl's mother was thinking is because we'd all assume the mother actually cares what happens to her child. As such, if you care what happens to your child, especially when they're at a young age such as 11, you should take precautions and know where they are if they're not at home. You should know who they're hanging out with. And you should be educating them about the dangers of the world. I'm not saying the mother didn't do that. I don't know. What I am saying is that people don't bring up these things to tell girls, hey bitch, if you get raped, it's your fault and I bet you liked it, slut. They're saying, this is a horrible thing that no one should have to go through, but the harsh reality is that people will have to go through it. Here are some things, such as knowing where your children are and who they hang out with, that may help in preventing it from happening to your children. It's all about being cautious and trying to minimize the problem. Modern feminists never seem to want to stop rape. It always seems like they're so quick to use the suffering of others to build the army of strawmen and beat the shit out of it for the political agenda, as they did in this article. And the sad part, I think they genuinely think they're helping. This is why victim blaming is a ridiculous concept. Asking questions is now victim blaming, instead of trying to figure out what could be learned from that experience and how it could help others not become victims in the first place. I really don't understand this new speak, and that is most likely the point. I was going to keep going with this article to show how Jos and the writers at Feministing go off the deep end, but this video is already dragging on. I encourage you to go to Against Visibility, read the article, and follow the links. We've only scratched the surface and I don't have enough alcohol to examine the rest of this iceberg.